Hey everybody, welcome to your favorite comic book YouTube. Oh wait, that's a different channel altogether. That's your line, huh, Jim? Welcome to Chris
right.
Anderson Comics. We have with us today Jim Rugg. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Chris. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you were able to make it onto the show. So I'm sure everybody that's watching this probably already knows you, but to run through sort of the bibliography. Um, you have Plain Janes. You do Street Angel, Aphrodisiac, which was Eisner nominated, right?
That's right.
That's right. You did Octobriana and Hulk Grand Design, and I was just looking at like a Wikipedia page of things that I like might have missed. And you did a book called One Model Nation.
Mm-hmm.
That was with Courtney Taylor Taylor of the Dandy Warhols. I did not know about that book. That's interesting.
Yeah, that came out about the same time as Aphrodisiac. And I don't know
Oh,
how much you want to get sidetracked, but I had been struggling financially. I had quit my day job and started trying to do comics full time. And it was right
uh-huh.
around the 2008, financial, I don't know what you would call that, but
Yeah.
uh, I lost a big graphic novel contract and a video game storyboard job, like within a couple of weeks of each other, both of which I expected to be like, these are my main paychecks for the next year. And
Yeah.
it was really tough to adjust. Like I had been used to working in a factory with 300 other people, and I had quit my job and was at home alone all day. And then you combine it with losing like two big jobs, and it was this state of panic. And I was ready to leave comics whenever the One Model Nation job showed up, but I was doing it simultaneously with Aphrodisiac, and they both ended up coming out probably within a month of each other or something like that.
That's how it
So
goes. Yeah.
yeah, it was very fortuitous, kind of kept me on this path.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad that it worked out like that because otherwise we wouldn't have you. We wouldn't have this channel. We wouldn't have Cartoonist Kayfabe, you know?
I don't know about all of those things, but hopefully most of us
Well,
would
if you were
still
going to
be
leave
here.
the industry, coming back would be hard once you turn your back on it.
I feel like you can find some cartoonists that have that story,
Yeah,
that they leave or they retire or they've had enough of comics, but here they are years later,
right.
they never get too far out.
Yeah. You do a lot of zines and things too. So you did Super Mag and marathon training about training for a marathon, right? Did
Yes.
you do that? You did that over lockdown, right? Or around
The
that time?
marathon was right before that. It was actually
Oh, okay.
whenever the first Street Angel hardcover was coming out from Image Comics. And I thought I was in pretty good running shape and I had never done a marathon. And so I thought like this would be a good way to keep my mind healthy while I'm getting, anxious about releasing a book and trying to promote that. And once I started the training, I was going to be running through training through the winter, which is hard. And I could use all the encouragement I could find. I
Yeah.
started making comics about each training session and posting them. And I said, it's kind of like positive peer pressure, got really good
Yeah.
feedback on it. But it also kind of like, once I state publicly, like I'm going to do this thing, then there's a lot of pressure to follow through. So it was kind of like my way of, keeping myself in line through that. And like I said, it got a good response. And it was like, it was like diary comics or journal comics, which a lot of cartoonists do. This one just happened to be very focused on the marathon training part of it.
That's a great way to keep yourself on track, And, you got a book by the end of it. So it's kind of perfect. And then you did like Silhouette and Cold Heat Special. I'm just looking at a piece of paper off the screen here.
Sure.
I haven't checked those out. So Notebook Drawings was actually the first time that we crossed paths, probably met back in 2012, I guess it would have been, here in Los Angeles. You had a show, right?
Yes.
So I assume that I met you. I probably would have, because at the same time there was this Brooklyn Library sketchbook project that also was launching the same day that your show was going on. And, I went to that, and then I saw all of these like incredible ballpoint pen sketches, and it blew my mind. And then years later, I made the connection that was you. And I thought that was pretty cool that we somehow crossed paths back in 2012.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That was a really great experience for me, that whole show. And the Brooklyn sketchbook project, it was completely Well, I mean, I don't, maybe the gallery had kind of like figured out this would be the right pairing, because I think it was in
Yeah.
the back, you know, it was like in
Yeah,
the
it was.
same building.
Mhm.
And it was just like, I don't know, that was a great time for me. I was very happy with the show I
Yeah.
had. And I think that the sketchbook project being there contributed a lot to the success of my show there.
Yeah, because a lot of people who contributed to the actual sketchbook, you know, because what it was the sketchbook project would send artists a little sketchbook. Everybody would, you know, fill it up and send it in, and then it would be archived, and they would take it around the country and you could check out, like a library, check out everybody's sketchbook, and you could look at the artwork. And so it happened to land in Los Angeles, like you said, at the same time as yours, and I was in that, so I went to it and brought a bunch of other people. Those people all picked up your book, but I was dirt poor at the time and I didn't pick it up. So now all my friends who are sort of like, you know, they like comics, but they're not really in comics, they all have it on their bookshelf. I go over to their house and see it, and then I'm like, oh, or I wish I had gotten a copy of that.
Well, hopefully, you know, I have been trying and thinking about doing a collection of those notebook drawings for a while. So hopefully
Yeah.
2024 will see that happen. So maybe you'll get another chance at it.
Hey, that's fine with me. I do have a couple of your other ones though, like Black and White, which, woo, man, that'll mess with your eyes.
I was going to say that one always looks good on screen.
Yeah, it looks even better in person, I think, sometimes. And I picked this one up from you, number 20. Is that what you're calling it?
Yes.
Or number XX?
Yeah, number 20. It's, you know, it's a collection of commissions and things. You
Yeah.
know, what happens for people that are maybe just collectors of comics and not necessarily makers is sometimes you'll do commissions, or you'll do covers, or you'll just work in your sketchbooks. And so if a show's coming up, it's a good excuse to gather some of those drawings and put them together in a zine or a sketchbook like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You also did you were the designer on the Little Nemo Dream Another Dream book, which is the largest book I have in my collection.
Yes. Yeah, that's how they got me to design it. That was a very busy time in my life. I was doing a lot of freelance, but it
Yeah.
crossed my desk, and it's like, it's so exciting as a designer to get to work on something that's a little bit unusual, and that's a giant book. You know, in my head, I thought I'll never get to work on a canvas that size again.
Yeah.
But hopefully, fingers crossed, I will.
Yeah.
But it was very fun. You know, like my background is graphic design, so it's something that I continue to do part-time here and there, kind of as a freelancer, but it's something I enjoy a lot. So whenever that project came up, it was like, I'm busy, but I got to carve some time out for this one. And that worked out great. You know, that book won a Harvey and an Eisner for its design. So
I was going to say, congratulations on that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that credit I think you can give to the anthology nature of it. There were a lot of great artists in it, so it was going to be a fantastic looking book no matter what. But I did do some stuff design wise that I'm very proud of on that book, and had a lot of fun working on it.
Yeah, you have just a great design sense, and you're always seem to be pushing it with every project. You're, you know, throwing in new ideas, and with your zines and everything that you do. So today you're basically here to talk about this new one that you have out, 1986, that you've been threatening to make for forever, right?
That's true. Ed asked me about, you know, how long it took me to make it, and it's like, well, I think I started it 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, it's not been the only thing I work on, but it's something that's been in my head for quite a while.
Sure. So what's so special about 1986?
1986 is whenever comic book shops became the #1 distribution method of comics in the US. Before that, it was newsstands. And there's a bunch of reasons I won't bore everyone with why that's important. But the short answer there is it allowed comics like Love and Rockets and 8-Ball and things that had a smaller kind of readership to succeed, because you would take pre-orders if you were selling them at comic shops, as opposed to newsstands where, like, typically you'd send hundreds of thousands of books to the newsstand, like of an issue of Batman, and you'd sell about half of them. So you had to do a giant number of sales in order to kind of offset the losses. With the comic book shops would order your book in advance. You might do, you know, Love and Rockets might do 20,000 copies, but the publisher knew, okay, let's print 22,000. And that meant the books were much more profitable because they weren't double printing, or, you know, they didn't have to compensate for only selling half of the print run, because they basically were selling them in advance. They were taking pre-orders, and it allowed much more personal voices to emerge. it allowed more specialized subject matter, as opposed to like, we're just doing this broad version of a story that we hope we can attract people all over the country with. It became much more like, I have a very personal story I want to tell, or my point of view I want to express in a comic. And the direct market allowed that to flourish, and so you see the rise of alternative comics coming up in the 80s. So by 1986, the comic shops were really starting to gain momentum because, of course, the publishers loved being able to sell their comics, to pre-sell them, and it'd be guaranteed money coming in. And so Marvel and DC get on board with the direct market. And then DC Comics releases The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's giant Batman book. And that book is a very expensive book. It's like $2.50, I think, for the first, like for a single issue of it. Yeah. And it sells through 3 printings, essentially, by the time issue 1 comes out. Like, it is completely sold out before the first issue hits the stands. They reprint it. Rolling Stone, Spin, all of these like big mainstream media outlets recognize it as being something special. It's kind of like this adult version of Batman. And as a result, a lot of people who had maybe read comics a little bit but had fallen away from them, they go back to the comic shops because they hear about this book that sounds really good and is very good. And it just kind of creates this whole new movement in comics. It was like, there are a lot of the articles that appeared in mainstream media were like, biff, bam, pow, comics aren't just for kids anymore.
Right.
And along with that, Mouse is collected. The first volume of Mouse comes out in 1986. So suddenly you have media looking at comics with the idea that comics aren't just for kids anymore. And you go from Dark Knight to like, oh, look at Mouse. Like, here's another great example of a comic that's not just for kids. As an adult, I can read this. I can get a lot out of it. And followed by Watchmen comes out. So, as people started to look at comics as different and not just for kids anymore, the timing was perfect. And a lot of these things were there whenever that different set of readers shows up. And that different set of readers, that's a more affluent audience. That's an adult audience. And so you got to try graphic novels. You got to start selling books in bookstores, comic books in bookstores. And it was just this, like, a lot of things coming together at the right time. And that time was 1986.
Right on. Yeah. It seemed like just like the special soup was just ready to just brewing and ready to be consumed at this point.
Absolutely. And so much stuff when I started looking into this, like I see the end papers, the front end papers and the back end papers are just an assortment of comic book covers from 1986. And they encompass everything from the big hits that we remember, like Dark Knight and Mouse, but also the self-published stuff is happening, like Jontar or Ryan, which is a little bit of like a manga coming into comics early on. The Japanese comics book manga is published in that era. Shatter is the first drawn on a Macintosh computer comic. So you have digital art starting to come into the comics. So again, it's just this like nexus of like a lot is happening. If you notice, there's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book cover in that spread beside Watchmen. That is First Comics is collecting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and doing them in color as like 3 or 4 issues at a time. So graphic novels. And I would see those in Walden Books, which was an old bookstore chain. It was one of the first graphic novels I saw in there. So, you had all these different things going from like, okay, let's push the limits of what comics are and something like Mouse and Watchmen, but also it's still a commercial medium. Let's sell the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to a bigger audience than just comic book stores, because they had become a phenom in the comic book stores. But now it was like, we can sell these to everybody, like, this is a cool book. We'll put some color on it. We'll package it as a book with a spine, and we'll try to sell it to people that may not have comic shops out there. And so you just have all this energy going in different directions. And that's what I'm trying to capture with this book.
Yeah, you have so many, like, the dam just burst open, it seems like, and everything we point to as being, some of the greatest things, in comics, so many of them did seem to come out this year. And, it's not like The Dark Knight Returns was started in 1986 either. He probably started drawing it well before that. I mean, many of these things. And so it just seems like serendipity that everything just sort of happened all at the same time,
Yes. And it's a little bit of that thing where, if you become obsessed with a number, you'll see it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I am now in the mode of trying to deprogram 1986 from my eyesight because I see it in like books that I look at and things that are unrelated to comics. But at one point I thought about doing this where it would be like basically cultural and I would be doing ads. Like there's an amazing Apple computer ad that's very iconic from 1986. There's obviously a lot of great movies from that year. And so that was something that early in the forming of this project was something I considered, and I was really seeing 1986 everywhere. And it was like, you know what, just comics. I'm just concentrating on the comics part of this.
This thing would have been a phone book if you had gone that route, you know?
Absolutely.
Year one came out the same year?
Yes, near the end of the year.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was just a loaded year. Ed and I were laughing because of this. The new universe, Marvel Universe, celebrates its 25th anniversary, and Jim Shooter initiates the new universe.
Right.
And on Cartoonist Kayfabe, we had been reading court transcripts from various like disputes between creators and publishers and things. And there was one where Jim Shooter's giving his testimony, and he says that the new universe, that was Marvel's answer to the Dark Knight. And it always makes me laugh just because, like, historically, I don't think anybody else would make that claim, but in the moment, that's what they were hoping for. But it's pretty exciting. You know, they certainly got behind it in terms of promoting it. And you see the ad there on the left side, and the ad on the right is just something I came across because I love the 80s black and white explosion books, because a lot of them are by one or two people. You know, they're self-publishing it, maybe with a print shop in their town or whatever. And so you would get a lot of these like very strange kinds of comics that would come out of the black and white explosion. And that's what you have on the right. But I thought, you know, a lot of this book is set up. What makes sense is 2 pages together, you know, and I see this ad and it's like, oh man, that's the perfect ad to put next to a new universe ad.
I don't know what Protostar is at all.
I've never seen the book itself. And for all I know, it might not have even made it to print, but it was advertised, you know, and I did come across the advertisement. And I think it was kind of like a co-op or an APA. It looks like you'd basically submit your work and they would publish it, which, you know, there were a few of those kinds of publishing efforts over the years.
That's crazy. And then you got the kitchen sink press stuff here and the small press watch. This looks like every kitchen sink ad that I ever saw, even into the 90s.
Yeah, it's interesting with that stuff too, because like Death Rattle in 1986 ran the first Cadillacs and Dinosaurs or Xenozoic Tales. You know, so that's a lot of this stuff. It would have legs, you know, was the other thing. Like I started reading comics probably in like 88, but there's so much legacy from 86. You know, if you're looking through, like, I would buy comics at flea markets. So I would be buying comics that were maybe a year or two old, were things that were very common. Yeah. But a lot of those comics were kind of like leftovers from 86, or somebody was getting rid of them a couple of years later. So that stuff was still around a lot, even though it wasn't necessarily 86 whenever I was getting it.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is we're going to talk about another book that was influential to you. And it talks also about this very same thing, which is kind of funny. But it talks about Yummy Fur #7 in here, and The Man Who Couldn't Stop. And it was probably the very late 80s, 89 or 91, 92, that I went into my local comic shop called Schinders in Maplewood, Minnesota, and pulled this issue out and found The Man Who Couldn't Stop. And my friend and I thought this was the most hilarious thing that we have ever seen in our lives, about a man who couldn't stop shitting so much that it burst through the walls of a prison and, you know, filled the entire world. And I didn't know, you know, years had passed and I didn't remember the name of the issue, or, you know, who drew it or wrote it. And then all of a sudden, just like recently, it popped up somewhere that it was Chester Brown from Yummy Fur. And then all of a sudden I start talking to you about what you want to talk about for our second episode. And it popped up in there, and then it popped up in here, and it just seems to be everywhere all of a sudden. Talk about things repeating themselves.
Synchronicity.
Yeah.
I love it. You know, one other note on that, on the page on the right at the bottom, you see Moondogs there.
Oh, here, yeah.
And I do a lot of like trying to make the most out of each page. So you'll see often several pieces like kind of collaged onto a page. In the case of Moondogs, it's one of the comic book stores that I think had the most stores as like a chain of comic book stores, which people often talk about, but there's never really been a successful, certainly not a national chain of comic book stores. And it's often, I've heard people wonder, like, why not? We have music chains and, you know, like video store chains and things. Like, there were a lot of these specialized retailers, but comic books, for whatever reason, never quite did it. And Moondogs is probably one of the ones that made it the furthest. I think they had, like, I don't know, 13 or 15 stores or something like that at their, you know, at their biggest, and across several states. So I thought it was neat to kind of note Moondog, and Larry Marder worked a lot for them. And then he goes on to work at Early Image as sort of like somebody who knew that direct market really well through his experience at Moondogs, and was able to kind of help in the early years of Image Comics, help those guys, you know, maybe, I don't want to say stay afloat, but kind of help them navigate the direct market in those early years.
Yeah, they needed that. You know, they needed somebody to do all that, more than just drawing pretty pictures and writing terrible stories.
Right.
And in here you get this ad for The Dark Knight, and it starts talking everywhere. Nowhere in here does it say The Dark Knight Returns, I noticed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting how that comes along as well. One of the kind of overarching stories throughout this book, Dark Knight comes out, I think it's in March of '86, the first book. And over the course of the year, one story is how successful it is, but then like a censorship and an anti, you know, once you start doing adult comics, now you get the backlash of like, whoa, these comics, what are your kids reading? You know, and this would become something that was featured on certain primetime television specials, you know, like some of those old like news magazine type TV shows would have specials on like, are comics too violent? You know, is there too much sex in these comics? And there was a backlash that builds in the same year, which I think is probably, if you think of like anything that is popular, at some point you become popular enough that you have like the haters, you know, like anything that's popular has both sides. And that happened to comics in the course of 1986. And Dark Knight was the center of both of those, you know, both the rise of the success of that direct market, but then also the backlash. A lot of it would target Dark Knight, you know, was the book fascist? Electra Assassin was another fantastic, one of my favorite comics that Miller wrote, but was criticized for being violent, having nudity in it. And like, what is this? You know, what if kids buy this? And it's like, I don't know. I think they'll be okay. But it was something that people would use to, you know, drum up controversy. If you're writing a news article or whatever, it was something that you could certainly write a controversial headline about.
Yeah, it was almost like they were trying to, you know, it was like a reverberation of the Wortham trials, you know, like.
Yes.
Trying to bring it back to all that, because, you know, comics don't have to be for kids, but the way that the American public viewed them, it was, you know, they still looked at it like, you know, cheesy, you know, 50s Batman issues or whatever.
Yeah,
this
100%.
is an interesting illustration. This is not from the book, I don't think. And this actually looks more like the way that Frank Miller draws now than it does the way that he drew back then. Maybe he inked it himself. Oh yeah, just an FM on it. Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. It's not, it doesn't have the Klaus touch.
It's remarkable whenever you look through this stuff, like the timeline is very short, you know, like when the book gets announced and he's working on it and then it's like, here it is, you know, like it's being published now. It happens really fast compared to now where we announce like, oh, there's this book that's coming out, but we know about it a year before it's coming out, you know, and the team's working on it and stuff. All of this is like the timeline's like crunched together, you know, with turning it around. And because the book was so popular, I feel like Miller was just, whatever artwork he could put out there for promo, you know, there was somebody that wanted it. And so you see a lot of this stuff that I think is kind of his sketchbook materials. But it's pretty cool to see it. Like you say, I think that a lot of the Sin City stuff probably comes out of the building of Dark Knight. You know, you can definitely see the artwork there. Very, very similar.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the pieces I loved was this Peggy May press release. This was, I actually found a zine recently, and it's 1986 DC Comics press releases. And I don't have it. A friend of mine has it. But it makes me curious, like what else they were promoting at this level, because I think that's pretty far ahead of the game, you know, sending out like professional press releases to media outlets. I don't know whether Marvel was doing that at the time. I don't know if any other publisher was doing that at the time. And I think this is pretty impressive. And apparently DC had this whole program of, you know, kind of press release and promoting this stuff even before 1986. And Peggy May, I'm under the impression that that is Peggy Burns, who is currently the publisher at Drawn and Quarterly. I might be mistaken, but I know that she did promo for them and publicity for DC in the 90s at some point. So it's hard for me to believe that DC had two publicists named Peggy.
Yeah, it's a pretty rare name.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that this is Peggy Burns. I think is possibly the publicist behind this press release, but it's just amazing to see like comics being treated like real media. You know, like you would promote a movie or a television show. They're promoting comic books, and it's amazing. It's very professional, and you know, like I said, I don't think that was the standard operating procedure for American comics at the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Yeah, that's a pretty cool piece to have in here. All right, so we got a lot of Dave Stevens love here.
I had recently watched the Dave Stevens documentary.
Yeah.
And kind of fallen in love with his artwork all over again.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking like, well, what all was he drawing in 1986? And, you know, he was a very popular artist, so he would do a lot of covers. And I just went and tried to find like all of his covers from 1986 to show off, you know, because the zine is celebrating everything I can think of with comics. And as we keep going, you'll see different avenues. Like at one point I look at all the Image guys. What are they doing in 1986? Or,
yeah.
You know, some of what are all the alternative cartoonists doing in 1986. So, you know, I was trying to come at this year from sort of different vectors. And the Dave Stevens piece, once I started getting covers, it was like, oh yeah, this is beautiful. This would be perfect. And a right-hand page, because, you know, the right-hand pages are, if you're selling advertising, that's the valuable real estate. So
yeah,
put some eye candy on the right-hand page for when you're flipping through, it'll stop you in your tracks, hopefully.
Well, you certainly didn't just throw this together. I mean, you really put a lot of thought into it. Like even the juxtaposition of the romance stuff over here, while Marvel premieres the romance line, and then you also have like, you know, cannibal romance right next to it. And then you know, Kurtzman's Jungle Book and Harvey's coming back. I didn't realize that I guess they had taken a hiatus for a while.
They did. Marvel took over publishing a lot of those Harvey, well, some of those Harvey properties, and they kind of dip in and out. I think they actually bow out in the early 90s, maybe 93, 94. And I think Ultraman, the licensed Ultraman comic, might be their last publication.
Okay. Speaking of Ultraman, I'm wearing the Paul Pope Ultraman shirt right now. Aircell obviously is coming out.
Because very early ad for Aircell. Yeah. You know, they were a heating and cooling company. You know, HVAC.
Is that where they got their name from?
It is. Yes, it is. And Barry Blair convinced them we should do comics. It's hard to believe that like heating and cooling was like in a down period. It feels like that would be consistent forever. But you know, he had this interest in making comics and talked the guy into like making a very hard right turn into publishing comics.
Oh, air conditioners aren't selling. We need to prop this business up. How about comics? Great idea.
There's a hot industry.
This is really cool to see this this freak show ad. And what's the thought behind putting all these together?
Those are just various pieces. Like I would assemble a lot of different things, you know. So the freak show, beautiful Bernie Wrightson art. It was just an ad I came across that I found striking and was like, yeah, can I get Bernie Wrightson into the 1986 zine? You know, figure this out. Transit, an early Ted McKeever, an artist I really like. I had mentioned a minute ago, Death Rattle, first appearance of Xenozoic Tales. So I had these pieces everywhere. And as I'm putting together final pages, this is an 80-page book, and was 100 pages at one point. And then I realized I could only do saddle stitch with this paperweight at 80 pages. And so I had to like then combine things, and I didn't want to lose, you know, I was in love with everything at that point. So I started ganging up pages, you know, like these probably would have been spread across a couple of full pages and some different arrangements like that. But as I was like, if, you know, I had to get rid of like all these pages. So some of this stuff becomes like grouped together. That 86 zine in the top left, where you see that's a Jesse Marsh Tarzan. Dylan Williams, who used to, the late Dylan Williams, published Sparkplug Books and was also a cartoonist. But he would do this stuff where like he would find Golden Age artists, cartoonists that he thought were really good and that other cartoonists could learn from, but they weren't easy to find. He would put together collections of their artwork. and just do a zine and like share it with different cartoonists. And because of the name 86, I thought that was I had to include that. I'm a big fan of Dylan Williams personally, and what he did, like he was a very instrumental in my career. And so I was happy to be able to include that as kind of a small nod to his work and what he's done over the years. But, he was very encouraging to a lot of artists.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ways that he would encourage them. He used to work at a comic book store, and he would take golden age comics that none of us could afford, and he would go like on his lunch hour and photocopy them.
Yeah.
And then share that with people. And, it was a way to kind of like keep the art form alive and keep the history alive for everybody.
Yeah, it's super important, like this era of comics, there's so many people who, help develop the language, and so many things that you can learn from their cartooning skills, and you hardly get to see them. And because maybe sometimes the stories aren't so, written so well, a lot of people skip over them. And, as I think you grow in your cartooning career, as you do with anything that you're really into, you end up start to go backwards and look at those things, and a whole new world opens up for you.
Absolutely. And some of this stuff, when I'm trying to figure out what to include, some of it is just from going through, like I looked at everything I could find: comics interviews, Amazing Heroes, comics journals, comic feature, comic scene, like everything I could find from 1986, I'm just going through. And I would be struck by the beauty of some of these ads. Like the Freak Show ad really jumped off the page whenever I saw it. And the stuff gets lost to history. Whenever people collect, they do book collections sometimes in these beautiful archives, but things like ads they just go away. Like we all see them because they're often appear in various different places. So, you might see an ad 20 times, like that Batman Year One ad in the beginning, I think is really iconic.
Yes.
Because it was in like every DC comic for a couple of months.
But
then it's gone, and Batman Year One gets reprinted 1 million times, but that ad doesn't. And so, some of it is just, I like preserving this stuff because it's a chance to see a beautiful Bernie Wrightson piece that I don't know that I've seen that ad,
I haven't,
other than when I started researching this.
Right. Yeah, this is a great archive.
The Comic-Con cover I found from Heritage Auctions, and it's John Romita. We lost John Romita this year.
Yes.
Rest in peace. And I just happened to come across, again, trying to think of everything I could to look at for 1986. And whenever I thought, oh yeah, Comic-Con, what's going on there? What's the program look like? And seeing John Romita doing the cover, it was like, yeah, that's great. Let's honor him, and include that. And Heritage Auction, like there's so many of these between comic art fans and Heritage. You can really see an amazing collection of comic art now. It's kind of mind blowing to me.
Yes, you can. It's wild. It's loved, and I love that they scan it at high res too, so you can really get in there and look at it.
Absolutely.
Got these Love and Rocket ads. You got this little article on Mr. Miracle here.
It's an article on the Kirby Awards. So, it's kind of a survey.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
What are the best comics, or what comics are being celebrated that year? And I figure that's, again, I'm dipping in and out of different formats between like articles and best of lists and interviews and excerpts and things and ads. But it's a chance to just take a snapshot of what's coming out and what's being celebrated around this time period.
What were the Kirby Awards? Who's giving those out?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure where they were held. They might have moved from location to location. And I think they were kind of a predecessor to the Eisners. I'm not sure where the Eisners begin, but I feel like there's some kind of like, from the Kirbys into the Eisners is the way I think of it. But I'm not sure about the people behind it or exactly how that developed.
This is a really interesting article because Heidi McDonald here goes through and talks about each nominate or each category and who they think is going to be, who's the front runner and who they actually think is going to win. And it's pretty funny who they pick sometimes.
Yes, definitely. And those are all the Love and Rockets issues that are published in 1986.
These ones here?
Yep.
Wow. And then you got you managed to sneak some wrestling in there.
Right off of a Soulson Comics, one of the fly-by-night black and white publishers had some kind of promotional deal with these wrestling magazines, with Bill Apter mags. And whenever I saw it, that middle magazine says like, 1986 year in review or whatever. How could I resist?
No, you had to put it in. this this ad for a subscription to the First Kingdom. I don't have any of these issues, but I really want, or there's a collection of it, I think now, right?
Yeah, they put out collections, and you can probably find issues
Yeah,
inexpensively
I
because
really
they
want
would
to dive
print.
in.
It ran 10 years, I think, to do it all. Like 24 issues, maybe it was a little bit more than 10 years, but they would keep the old issues in print, so like you can find multiple printings of several of the early issues, and as a result, they're not that expensive if you want to go the original issue route.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
that's
it's
good
one
to
of
know.
those staples of the early direct market. Whenever I would
Yeah,
see direct market ads, it was First Kingdom, Cerebus, and ElfQuest.
right.
And they would even do like those three books in one ad.
Yeah,
So it's kind of cool that First Kingdom, 10 or 12 years in the making, and the conclusion is in 1986.
wild. This is I assume one of your local Pittsburgh shops that used to be in business.
This is Bill Boychelle, who runs Copacetic Comics, which I
Ah,
say, best comic shop in the world, and pour one out for it. It's closing down at the end of this month.
right. Going
Um,
online, right?
They would also, yes, they would also, he would produce comics at different times. And Transformer
Interesting.
was a comic that he would make with some local talent. If you look at that top left image that kind of looks like Rorschach and preceded Rorschach, that's Tom Greinberg, who
Mm,
has a long career. I think he's done some of the Tarzan syndicated comic strips most recently, but he came through like Continuity Studios, like a Neil Adams kind of style, and has a long list of credits. But he had come through Pittsburgh for a while, and found Bill Boychelle, and they did some comics together before he really got on that professional level. So these are some of the publications of Transformer. I think this came out of the Small Press Comics Explosion magazine, but I get lost in history too with some of where these sources are coming from, but I believe that's where I pulled this ad out of. And then the middle piece, this was a combination page because the store hours,
right.
Fantagraphics had done this as a Love and Rockets promo that, comic book stores could hang on their door or whatever, let people
Yes.
know what their hours of business were. I had this set up as two different pages, but again, when it was time to combine, to trim 20 pages,
Sure.
I didn't want to lose either of these things.
No.
So I thought this was a nice kind of mix because it is a comic book store ad with comic book hour, promo sign.
Well done. All right. So Akira is coming, huh? Akira Club.
Yeah. And, once again, trying to look at like as many different vectors of comics as I could. So these were not issues that were published in America in 1986. But if you
Okay.
see that block of text on the right there, that's all the chapters of Akira that were printed in 1986. And it is astounding. Like
In
if you
Young
do your,
Magazine, right?
yes, if you do
Yeah.
your count on that, you can't believe the amount of comics pages Otomo produced, at the level of detail that Akira is. It's just like a comics factory producing that much work. But that comes out of the Akira Club, the box set of Akira that was published not too long ago. They have the Akira Club book that has like a lot of notes and
Yeah.
cover pieces and things that you might not see otherwise. And they had their whole publishing schedule. So what you see in terms of the artwork there, those are the pieces from each chapter that was printed in 1986 as well.
So it looks like it came out bi-weekly and it's got about an average of 18 pages. So that's like nine pages a week that he's kicking
Yes.
out, but obviously kicking out more than that because he needs a day to, not sit at a table.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of time wise, this is about, I think, when he's working on the anime.
So right.
So
So he's kicking that out and doing all that.
it's shocking. It's completely mind blowing to me. But again, like think of 1986 and like the energy around comics. And it's like, how big is Akira as a cultural, as a comics touchstone? And, a huge part of it comes out of 1986.
Yeah, big comics energy in 1986 for sure. Like I feel like half of our bookshelves are probably full of just stuff that came out this year, 1986.
Yeah, you could definitely find a lot if you start looking at those dates.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised.
Well, I don't want to go insane like you.
Good advice. That's what this book is for. This is your cliff notes of 1986. So if you don't want to
Right.
go out and track down all of these 1986 publications, this is the much easier way to do it. Just get a touch of comics history.
Absolutely. Look at all the Ninja Turtle ripoffs from the year, and Ninja Turtles is included in there. But what the heck?
Yeah, that's a running joke through a lot of the magazines, as you can imagine. A lot of the editors just ragged on this kind of just crass commercialism, you know.
Oh yeah.
But it speaks to where the market is, that it would support this many blatant ripoffs. You know, like many of these people, they were able to make money with their third-rate Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle ripoff because that's what business was at this point.
For sure. For sure.
Those two editorial notes, both of those are kind of trashing the turtle ripoffs and saying how it's not funny and knock it off.
Well, you know, they weren't wrong, but
right.
You know, but you know, there's something to that too. Damlog hits in 1986.
Yes, and I really like Damlog. It's one of my favorite black and white books. Rain Ness, the artist, I think is outstanding.
Yes.
I had never seen this piece of Damlog art, which is why I included it. Damlog is something that I have some panels of in the BW zine, which is much more focused on the comic books, you know, the self-published comic books of that time.
Right.
But Damlog is one that you know, it's on my short list of the best of those black and white explosion books. And whenever I saw this ad, I was like, you know, new to me, Rain Ness art. So if it's new to me, it's probably new to a lot of people. Like I said, you know, these ads, they're just lost to history. So I figured it's a chance to show off some great Rain Ness art, and hopefully some Rain Ness art that most of us haven't seen before.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I did a video on this with Matt King of Tales to Enlighten. He picked this to be the book that he wanted to talk about, and I'm so glad that he did. I had to track down a copy of it, and it's a treasure of my collection now, because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, it's really outstanding. You know, a lot of those books, they get ridiculed for being amateur, but there are also a lot of gems in there. And Rain Ness was really one that stood out to me whenever I found it.
Yeah, especially for the time, he was no amateur. You know, the way that his stuff looked. You know, there was some goofy things going on in it. You know, he was still young. He was just, you know, I think he was like 19 or something when he was doing this. Young. He was young. Probably just made that up, but he was young.
Definitely.
Silver Wolf Comics Index. And this is
I don't know how much you know Silver Wolf, but of these like 86, 87 kind of black and white explosion, you know, people were trying to capitalize on the opportunity. And I have some context there on the left about Chris Silver, who was the publisher of Silver Wolf. And you see like one of these comments is Silver was a strange nunchuck wielding nerd who owned Alexander's Comics in South Sacramento. It kind of paints a picture of who Chris Silver was as a publisher and taking advantage of this time. And then the right side, that is a comprehensive list of the Silver Wolf output with summaries, creators, the dates they were published. And that's actually 86 and 87. But I thought it was cool to have like the whole catalog of Silver Wolf represented there, because Chris Silver would go on and do Greater Mercury Comics. And I think Venetian was another publishing imprint that he would run into the 90s. But Silver Wolf itself lasted 86, 87. And there's your list of titles. The creators include people like Ron Lim, Tim Vigil. I think Rob Liefeld was advertised at one point that he was going to do some of his early work there. And I don't think it ever happened. And I'm not sure why. But, you know, like being in California, there were creators and pros that came through that went on to have careers that we all know. And some of them had a stop there at Silver Wolf. So I figure it's, you know, if we're going to show the big books of the 86, you see this guy was really plugging away. You know, I think at one point he was doing like 18 books a month, I think, were solicited one month. So
that's just crazy.
It is. Yeah. Over the top.
Well, good for him.
Yeah.
So you got Usagi over here. Was he just did this just come out in 1986?
This was an ad for the summer special was 1986. He had
Okay.
been working in, was it Critters? I can never remember. You know, Usagi started in an
Yes,
anthology
Critters.
like a furries anthology,
Yeah.
and then was slowly breaking out. And this is one of those early breakouts with the summer special.
Gotcha. And here's an Electra ad with a bunch of headlines
Yeah, Bill Sienkiewicz, you know,
and quotes.
clippings from Bill Sienkiewicz interviews
Yeah.
about working on this book. And like I say, I love Electra Assassin. It's one of my favorite comics. So it's always kind of cool to see. It's interesting, like the lead up to the book. And then I think when it came out, there was a lot of silence. You know, because like we've talked to Bill Sienkiewicz on Cartoonist Kayfabe, and it's always, I want to hear about Electra Assassin. And you can almost see, like, I think the response to it initially maybe colored it a certain way for him. You know, his enthusiasm doesn't feel quite as intense as mine. But I think over time,
Right.
that book has gotten its due. But I think at first it
Yeah.
was so far ahead of everything else that was out. I think people just really didn't know how to kind of contextualize it, especially with other comics. And since then, I think it's really gone on to be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we get our introduction into Charles Burns with Big Baby and the raw stuff that he's doing.
Yeah, for me, if you're gonna do 80s, you know, you kind of have to represent raw. It's another one of those books I think has a huge influence on where comics have gone. So it's fun to see, like, when you pinpoint one year, what exactly is going on in that time frame. And Charles Burns, one of my favorite cartoonists, so it's pretty cool that he gets a one-shot graphic novel at that time.
Like how you and then we got Matt Wagner doing both Grendel and Mage.
Yeah, we just talked to him on Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Yeah.
And in preparing for that, he starts Grendel, I think it's 1982 or 1983 when Grendel starts, and it's black and white and doesn't sell very well. And ends up doing color Grendel and color Mage at a time when black and white is selling well. And sometimes I wonder, like, was his switch to color something that really gave him an advantage? Because there aren't very many creators who their legacy is creator owned, you know? And Wagner is one of those guys that, especially from this time period, there's very few, I think, maybe Steve Rude and Mike Barron with Nexus, but a lot of people either became better known working Marvel, DC, and maybe they had a creator-owned book, or, you know, it was a stepping stone. But in Wagner's case, you know, Mage and Grendel are still these huge characters. And I sometimes wonder, like, his switch to color, if that gave him a leg up at the time, you know, and really made those books kind of feel like they were, you know, better books than the typical indie books of the time period.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also, the fact that Grendel was such a strong design of a character too, you know, really stood out. Didn't hurt him any, you know?
No, of course. That's the other thing I think of, because I think Mage is an equally amazing character design. And I look at both of those and I think, like, whenever Marvel or DC is, you know, they'll redesign their characters and stuff, man, throw some money Matt Wagner's way, because it seems like he has a real knack for character design.
Yeah. Well, Mage is basically just him with a lightning shirt on, right?
I suppose, but it still looks good. And it stands out against, you know, a lot of these other characters.
What is this here?
This is Rick Parker, one of my favorite letterers. He was he did a ton of lettering and worked in the Marvel bullpen, but he also drew Beavis and Butthead. If you ever saw the Marvel comics, Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
Fantastic cartooning. Like, Rick Parker's a very good cartoonist, but professionally known mostly as a letterer. And this ran across the bottom, I want to say, of Amazing Heroes, but, you know, you can kind of see how these strips are cut and pasted into this spread, because they were like footnotes in an interview. And I put them all together because, like, it's an Ames lettering guide, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't pass that up.
No, you of all people couldn't pass that up.
This was a concept spread that kind of got away from me. I was looking at doing this as, like, okay, I'm going to do war comics. You know, what's the state of war comics in 1986? And you can see, like, the big Doug Wildey piece. I love him as an artist. Not exactly war comics there. So it kind of got away from me a little bit. But that's how you get, like, Tales of the Green Beret, which was Joe Kubert, and the Nom #1, you know, like a big release. I think that might have been a December release. So it just kind of comes in under the wire for 1986. But a significant book. Like, when I was a kid, I wasn't quite collecting yet, but my friend and his brother did. And I remember like they loved Nom, and it was kind of expensive. Once that book came out, it was hot for a while.
Yeah. Well, especially the Zafino issues are, standout issues that everybody tries to pick up,
Yeah, some of the best covers ever done.
Mm-hmm. Doug Wildey, up until about a month ago, I had no idea who that was. And then just yesterday, I recorded an episode with James Coates, who said that he wanted to do it about an episode about the Johnny Quest Classics issues that he did.
Those are great issues. Those are really great issues.
And then I asked Dave Baker to come on and what he wanted to do, and he wanted to do those exact same 3 issues. So another thing that just seems to keep coming at me lately is Doug Wildey.
He's phenomenal. He worked a lot with Alex Toth when it came to animation. I think Doug Wildey brought Alex Toth in on Johnny Quest. I think that's the way it went.
Yeah.
But those two guys kind of circled each other quite a bit in animation, and Doug Wildey, man, can draw.
Yeah, I really got to pick up that Rio collection. So this is interesting, this how to publish comics and how to become a comic artist, with a foreword by Stan the Man Lee.
This is another one of those. This is comparable to Silver Wolf, where it's just like a cash grab. And this is Sal Brodsky, the longtime Marvel production guy, I want to say. I think he was at Marvel. Don't quote me on that. He may have been DC. I think he was Marvel. But this is his son, and that's how he got the name Soulson, because he was Saul's son, Saul Brodsky. So, it's almost like it kind of comes at this honest, it's in the family business making comics, but these Soulson comics are not very high quality. I think this was definitely taking advantage of, hey, we can sell these. Let's get these to press. But the interesting thing, I mentioned First Comics doing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle color graphic novels.
Yeah.
At the same time, Soulson has a license for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they're doing the martial arts manuals. So it's almost like this is the cash grab version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles licensed comics. And then you have like First doing sort of like the quality version of licensing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle material. And, it's just early in the Turtles. Like the Turtles are 84 when they start. This is 86. And we've already got 2 licensed other publishers doing Turtles comics in America within 2 years. Like before the cartoon, it's really, I find that really interesting, but these are not great comics by any stretch. Plus the
role-playing game, right?
Yeah. Palladium Books. Yep.
You have, I love this, in pencil, you write the first Jim Lee.
Yes.
Wow. This whole Rocky Balboa, G.I. Joe debacle.
Mm-hmm. Look at how much that character does not look like Sylvester Stallone or Rocky.
Not at all. And in fact,
anyway.
Yeah, no. And I think that they kind of like took this design and split it into 2. And because there's a character that looked like this character, but no boxing gloves. And then also, like around the same time, I remember a character coming out with boxing gloves. They must have already been like, I don't know, maybe they were, no, because Hasbro got mad at Marvel about it, which means Hasbro wouldn't have been already doing anything with that. Never mind, I take that back.
Sadly, that Sylvester Stallone Guide to Making Movies, that's a Soulson comic.
Yeah.
It was never published as far as I know.
Oh, no. That's too bad.
Yeah. I'm sure we didn't miss out on anything. It's got to be better in our head than if it had actually been published. I'm sure it would have been disappointing.
Listen, if you guys want to go and read good Sylvester Stallone comics, go and read Rambo 3.5, all right?
Exactly. That's right.
And then Dark Horse Presents comes out this year.
Yeah, this is the beginning of Dark Horse Comics. So, pretty landmark thinking about what they've done since 1986, really going on to be a legendary publisher.
Yeah. One of the few publishers now that has a viable creator publishing option.
Yeah, and they had it from the beginning. You see there with Dark Horse Presents, with stuff like Concrete and Black Cross, like it was creator friendly, from the get-go.
Yeah. And this is a really cool spread where you talk about the image founders and where they're at in 1986. So you have, you know, the ad for Youngblood coming out at Megaton, Liefeld and Hank Canals. This was interesting. I didn't know about this. Is it on the screen? Yeah, okay. So Jim Lee timeline, summer 1986. Lee and Brandon Choi create Wild Boys, which Lee submits to Marvel. Lee is hired by Marvel as a result. I did not know about that.
Yeah, I think that's a Wizard. That's from a Wizard magazine. And again, it's kind of random, you know, like I would come across this stuff and be like, oh, yeah, that's noteworthy. And I think that's a really good one because, like you, I had not heard that before. I also think it's interesting to think like Jim Lee starts at Marvel in 1986. He had done that piece in Soulson. I think he was inking in Soulson that previous couple pages ago.
Yeah.
That's also 1986. So essentially, he starts in comics in 1986. And
Yep.
5 years from then, he sells 8 million copies of X-Men #1. Like you talk about using your time, you know, like that's a guy who really progressed from breaking in to being the top selling artist in 5 years. It's amazing.
You know, he wasn't screwing around. You know, listening to interviews and things with him, it was like sort of a, you know, he was supposed to go to medical school, and, you know, and his parents, you know, wanted him to go to medical school, and coming from the Korean culture, you know, if you better make it if you're not going to become, you know, become a medical school student. So he did everything that he could to level up and level up and level up to the point where he even had to put his arm in a sling, you know, so he was not screwing around.
No, not at all. I think it's kind of cool to see though, like the actual Youngblood and Dragon both appearing in print at that time is
this never wild. Actually came out, right? Youngblood?
No.
Right. But this did, but the Megaton issues with Dragon did.
Yeah, and that Dragon, if you look at him, it's a different version of Dragon. He is back in Dragon now.
Yes,
that version of the character.
Yeah, cool. It is cool. I mean, you just gotta love Erik Larsen. He's just going full steam ahead. He doesn't care if anybody reads it or not. He's just gonna do it, and it's still fun, and it's weird, and it's good. Like,
I just picked up that issue where they moved to San Francisco and was super excited to read it. You know, it's kind of a jumping on point. I think he didn't make a big enough deal about like, hey, if you ever liked Savage Dragon, come on back and try this issue. You know, I feel like he needed McFarlane as like his PR guy for that issue. But I was excited to read it. I had a good time with it and plan to read more of them now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing, Erik Larsen's career. But you know, Mark Silvestri's mentioned there, and from a design point of view, like one of the things I like with these zines is that I get to basically make a magazine. This is your centerfold. So like I always tell people, if you're doing like a mini comic or even a comic book, they break open naturally if they're saddle stitched to that middle, to the centerfold. So put something good there, because again, like when somebody picks it up at a show, this may be the page that they see because it just naturally opens to it. And I thought having the image guys here, that's a pretty heavy hitting piece, you know, for a certain segment of fans that I think are my fans.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what we were talking about just before we started recording, where it's like, you know, use the medium for as what it is, you know, and as in the physicality of it, because like we're talking about how it's like, you know, if this part of the show didn't record, it would be basically a podcast and be useless because we're looking at images.
Right.
You know, so if you utilize the fact that this thing's going to pop open at 80 pages, it's busting at the seams, you know, this is going to be the first thing you turn to. And it's like a great spread. So we got Man of Steel and we got Wonder Woman here. And this is great. The first the Dark Knight, then the Man of Steel. Now DC does it again with Wonder Woman. I don't recall this run of Wonder Woman.
This is the George Perez run. This is
the kickoff. It is.
Yeah, this is that's George Perez art.
Oh yes.
And then that's that launch of, I don't know what volume of Wonder Woman it is, but like he goes on to do a lot of work there, including writing and working. I think Karen Berger is his editor. So, you know, you think of Karen Berger and her legacy in comics.
Yeah.
You know, she's doing Swamp Thing with Alan Moore probably around this time. And then she's doing Wonder Woman, working with George Perez as he starts to write. So it's kind of a heady
What year did Vertigo launch? Do you know?
I don't know offhand. Early, not maybe,
but not
early
yet.
90s.
Oh,
no,
okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
It didn't even launch like when Sandman is being published. It's not even Vertigo at first. You know, it's a couple of years into Sandman, I believe, before it becomes an imprint.
So here's where you get about people talking about, how comics are, not for kids and kind of freaking out too, huh?
Yes. Yeah, like I say, that becomes there was a lot of content along those lines. It was like a double-edged sword, because if you're the ones publishing these comics, you want coverage in the press.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of that press starts to then go dark on them.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like what you have to take. Like that's the deal. If you're going to shine a spotlight on it, you're going to see blemishes and warts and all, as
Right.
they might say.
Yeah, I remember at the Shinders by my house growing up, there was definitely a side room that was, you had a curtain on it, there was the porn back there, but it was also a lot of, underground cartoonists and heavy metal magazine and things like that. So they were really trying to keep it separate, but
Right.
doesn't mean that I didn't get my hands on that shit.
Yes. And by the way, if you see the article underneath the cover there on LA Weekly, it's by C.C. Beck, the creator
Oh,
of Captain Marvel.
yes.
So even he is weighing in on it. And I think he passes on not too long after this, if I'm not mistaken. But he was doing a column for the Comics Journal, and it would cover a wide variety of topics. But at this point, he's weighing in on this whole concept of comic books for grownups, because that became like a talking point. Everybody had a take on it.
That's wild. Ah, the LA Weekly. When I first moved here, I had to grab every single issue of it. It had, like Life in Hell and all the
Yes.
like really cool underground comics. And now it's just, I don't even know what it is. I don't even know if they put it out anymore.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I remember doing covers for them, as a freelancer over the
Yeah.
years. Mention a Lone Wolf and Cub, trying to track like the early manga that's appearing. Not a lot in the in '86, but little bits here and there.
Sure. Not really going to hit the States until Dark Horse starts publishing it.
Eclipse starts publishing with
Ooh.
Viz. They start like My the Psychic Girl and
Okay.
Kamui and I forget what the Area 88, but they partner. And from the very beginning, I guess Viz was going to go off on its own, but they kind of wanted to have a partner that knew the direct market. So they published for the first year or two with Eclipse as like
Okay.
co-publishers, and then Viz goes off on its own. But Lone Wolf and Cub is first, first publishing, not just first being first manga, but I mean like literally the publisher's first comics.
Right.
And with the Frank Miller covers, which is, the other part is like Frank Miller he's such a big player at this stage and really kind of has some clout. If you can get Frank Miller to do your manga covers, you're going to get a bunch more eyeballs on them at this time.
Absolutely. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, this is another one of combining various pieces. There are a couple of ads here that have the big Frank Miller quotes, the Dalgada and Cordo Maltese.
Yep.
Sinner, which is not a Frank Miller quote, but I feel like it could be very easily. I think that's a comic that influenced Miller in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Valentino showing the last piece of the Image Gang, what he was up to at this point. He had done Normal Man before this, and now he's returning to like auto-bio stuff. And then the True Crime piece. This is Mr. Monster, Michael T. Gilbert, publishing public domain crime comics by Jack T. Cole, the Plastic Man creator.
Yeah.
And they're amazing comics. These are some of the best crime comics ever made. Jack Cole, fantastic cartoonist. And this is what, in the 80s, like, it's not like we had the internet or archive editions of this material. This would have been our chance to see Jack Cole, somebody that we heard was great, but wasn't easy to find. And if you did, you probably couldn't afford it as a young reader. So this was, I think, probably a lot of people's first exposure to these comics.
Yeah, and this cover is by Cole.
Mm-hmm.
This blasting through him, it spells out rat with the bullet holes. Amazing.
That Future Beat is one of those black and white explosion books that I like. And I included that because besides being a legit good comic, if you look on the left, there's a column that says distributed by, and it kind of lists like, there were so many distributors at the time. Like, you could be a self-publisher, and part of the way that you could succeed is because of all these distributors. Some of them, kind of specialized in these smaller books, and some of them were geographically located. So that's why you might work with, 10, 12, 15 distributors, because like this handles, the Great Lakes area, and this company handles Southern California. And, you would get a little bit of money from each of these distributors, ideally. And
Yeah.
together, you could kind of make that work. And all of that goes away in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've got Yummy Fur, as we talked about before, and Mouse coming out.
Yeah, both, gigantic books for me, huge influences. Things that I read whenever I was a pretty young reader. I found Yummy Fur at Mid-Ohio-Con one year, the collection I Never Liked You. It was autobio, and it was about probably about middle school age, maybe high school age autobio. I'd never read anything like that. And it was so relatable compared to, I was reading Wolverine and X-Men.
Yeah.
So to read something that was about a kid struggling to talk to this girl he liked, it really was blew my mind as oh, comics could be this. And Mouse, I had started pre-ordering. I found a comic book store. I started to be able to drive, so I could go to a comic book store, and that meant I could pre-order things out of the catalogs. And that's how I got Mouse. They had put out the 2-volume box set collection.
Yeah.
And so I would order this stuff, and Mouse was another one like Yummy Fur, where I was I didn't know comics could be like this. I'd never seen anything like that. And honestly, I still haven't. I'm not sure anybody's followed Mouse in terms of some of the things, the boundaries that it pushes.
No, it's tough. It's a tough act to follow. That's for sure.
It definitely is. But it was an amazing piece to find whenever I was young and still trying to figure out mechanics of making comics and what comics could be. That one was talk about expanding the frontier of what was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it won a Pulitzer, for God's sakes.
Right.
And then here's where you're kind of talking about where is Dark Knight fascist.
Yes. Yeah. This is another one of those spreads that I'm very, very happy with. If you look on the right, it's Scott McCloud's Destroy. That's an ad for Destroy, the loudest comic book in the universe. And then kind of blowing up in front of Destroy is the Zot mini comic issue. But I feel like that Destroy is the perfect facing page for is Dark Knight fascist?
Yeah. We get into Kirby versus Marvel. This was going on in 1986, huh?
Yeah, that was going on all through the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
But there were definitely there's a lot of ink coverage on it and a lot of creators weighing in on it. Like I said, with the CC Beck thing, everybody was talking about comics for, adults. A lot. Jack Kirby versus Marvel was another topic that seemed like everybody was weighing in on.
For sure. I mean, CC Beck even signed the list.
Yeah.
And Eisner's letter to Marvel.
And if you look at this artwork, the Kirby art in the bottom corner, that is fan art from Amazing Hero, and it's signed David Johnson. And I believe that's Dave Johnson that we all know as a cover artist for 100 Bullets and a lot of other comics.
Yeah, I'll have to ask him. He was sort of one of my mentors, and I can always ask him. I'll find out about that. But it looks like his work, early work.
So. Yeah.
Especially that that's super patriot-y stuff. So he could draw from the get-go.
Yeah.
Let's see here. We're talking about Picard on the Letterman show, and talking about people kind of expanding beyond comics here, because you got Gary Panter designing for Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Yeah, again, trying to represent as many of these big artistic, contributors to comics as I could. And Pee-wee's Playhouse, I mean, think of how many people saw Gary Panter's work as a result of that. Millions of people.
What is this Life Brigade thing that it's sold, 10,000 copies in its first release? I don't know what this is.
This is one of the black and white comics from the 80s. And it was one that I found when I started buying that stuff, where I was like, wow, this is really good. Not good in a traditional sense exactly, but it's very rigorous. And if you see it, there's all kinds of art technique on display. The lettering is phenomenal. I actually have an original page because Chris Pitzer of Ad House Books ended up finding a big stack of the artwork from Life Brigade. But basically, it's an 80s black and white explosion book. It's a guy who had some experience making comics. And whenever the opportunity to make his own comic came up, he was pretty successful. Blue Comet is the publisher that he created. You know, he's the publisher of Blue Comet. They end up publishing several other books into the 90s. So, you know, starting in 86, he has probably a 6 or 7 year run as a publisher. And I think a lot of it comes out of the momentum from the success of Life Brigade #1, which went through several printings and pretty good. You know, if you come across it in a dollar bin, I'd highly recommend it as something worth $1 for sure.
Okay, I will for sure. Because it kind of seemed like, because I had never heard of it, and it kind of seemed like this ad was, or this release was blowing smoke. And I was just wondering if it was just sort of like a, you know, they're inflating numbers or something.
I don't think so. And actually, a lot of these numbers,
not.
10,000 feels a little bit low to me with what a lot of these successful black and white books would sell. Like it wasn't unrealistic for them to sell 25,000 copies, which is just shocking, you know, when you think of the state of comic sales today. Like really comic companies that had no track record and not a lot of quality were able to sell these huge amounts. But it speaks to kind of the difference between now and then, because, you know, comic book shops are not the main sales outlet of comics today in America. So much like they supplanted newsstands in 86, like they've been supplanted by book outlets, which probably is code for Amazon, but it's still, you know, if you think of who sells the most comics, it's no longer comic shops.
Right.
So that shapes the industry a lot, you know, it shapes the content a lot. Distributions influences everything, including the creative.
Absolutely. What do you have going on here?
This is another mashup of just a lot that's happening. There's a Toth Bravo for Adventure is being reprinted. I love Alex Toth, so that's something I want to, you know, again, looking at like what's out there, what artists can I represent what they were doing in 86, you know, got to include Toth if I get a chance. That Newsline article at the top is Don Rosa is getting his first Uncle Scrooge comic published.
Okay.
And, you know, there are people that argue he's more significant as a duck artist at this day and age than Carl Barks, but that starts in 1986. You know, his first venture into that universe is 1986 as a creator. So pretty significant historically there. Rocketeer moving to Kamiko from Pacific. You know, I mentioned Dave Stevens earlier. Reagan's Raiders is a Soulson book. I just have a soft spot for it. It's maybe the dumbest of everything.
So weird.
Yeah, completely. Kind of fun though. That's another one. If you find it for $1, I would recommend it. There's a wrestling comic there. So this is a catch-all. You know, like one of the things as I'm going through all of these magazines is pulling headlines that I think are interesting. You see Mickey Mouse strip artist Floyd Gottfredson, one of the great cartoonists, dies in 1986. So I have that headline mentioned. What Raw is publishing at that point. And, you know, again, stuff that I was sort of like piling up as I would go through. It would be like these kinds of pages. And part of it is you're making a magazine. So I want the spreads to be different from spread to spread. Some stuff is purely eye candy, but I want some of it to be like, read it, like it's content. This is comics history, and it's history from, you know, it's found history. Do you know the movie Atomic Cafe? I
don't.
I'm not sure when it was made, but it's all found footage. So it almost feels like a documentary, except that there's no obvious, like there's no narrator, you know, what story is there, you're sort of linking. And obviously the editor is very important, but it's all found footage of like nuclear, like atomic testing, and then like films that were shown, like educational films, like Duck and Cover with the turtle shell of like, hey, if you see the mushroom cloud, get under your desk at school.
Yeah.
I saw that maybe, I think I had a film class in college is the first time I saw it. And it just had it left such a mark on me. You know, I've always been a fan now of like found material. And so the chance to like pull some of these news items out that are from the time period, you know, like I think there's value in that, like seeing like, how was this stuff reported or talked about at the time?
Yeah. And it allows the reader to, you know, kind of make sense of it themselves.
Yeah. And it's something that doesn't exist anymore. You know, there's not like monthly issues of Comics Journal or Amazing Heroes or Comics Feature that are doing comics news. You know, like we get that stuff. If we get it at all, it would be just something online. And, you know, it's just very different than it used to be.
Absolutely.
Got it. Really neat. Catalan is one of those publishers that I love going back. You know, I mean, it had so many great artists, and that was a lot of European imports and a few Japanese artists that would have been like the first time we saw them in English was from Catalan Communications, the publisher. And so I wanted to represent them. You know, again, I had checklists in my head of like what are markers, who are publishers, creators that I want to make sure that get represented, and Catalan Communications is one of those big publishers for me.
And then you have the Ninja Turtles Cerebus team up happening that year.
Yeah, you got to represent the Turtles. I don't know how you could do in 1986 without Turtles. And if you turn the page, the Turtles coverage continues.
Yes, it sure does.
So some highlights there, the first collection that I've talked about now several times, but also an Amazing Heroes piece of art from an interview with Eastman and Laird. But I always loved when you would see like studios, and in this case, Eastman and Laird drawing their studio.
Yeah.
Space is always fun. And that's, again, artwork that, like, that stuff's not, when else are you going to see it if you don't buy that back issue of Amazing Heroes?
Right. Well, you've preserved it in this. So
yeah, absolutely.
So you got Rip in Time, some Corbin stuff there.
Self-published Corbin at the time, Fanagore Press. That's a publisher that I would like to showcase more of. You know, we haven't really gone down that road, but he did very high quality, like he did full color books and things that he self-published, which pretty exceptional in the 80s. You know, I'm sure it wasn't cheap to do, and some of them are beautiful. You know, if you know Corbin's art, nothing else looks like that.
He had such a weird, interesting career.
Yeah,
and he made it work for himself.
Yeah, and it's fantastic now that Dark Horse is doing the, publishing his stuff in high quality archives, because a lot of the Corbin stuff was always hard to find.
Yeah. And what's his name that's helping recolor that?
Rubio.
Yeah. He's doing the Comics God's work, I swear.
He really is. And I don't know the details exactly, but I'm sure he is, getting paid next to nothing for the amount of time it takes to do that kind of work. There just aren't budgets really in comics, in American comics, for that, unfortunately. And I think for everybody watching, if you ever see Jose at a convention, go thank him. Yeah. Because whatever they're paying him, I'm sure he's putting in extra work, and it really is God's work. It's
I just saw him. He was just at Baltimore.
Yeah, I had a long talk with him there, and I did the same thing, man. It was like, thank you.
Yeah, I went up and thanked him too, for sure. You got more things here. Washington, D.C. television station reports on Sick Comics, and then Marvel sold to New World Pictures, so they're sloughing it off to someone else.
Yeah, Marvel, of course, being sold a couple times over the decades, and I feel like that's a big story. It's always interesting to see what those sell for, right? I think it was $4 billion to Disney in the what was that, early 2000s, and then 40 to 50 million in 86.
Wild.
And that too has a big influence on the shape of these, of the way comics have gone, having these different owners that are trying to profit from it.
Exactly. And then you get this great ad for Mr. Miracle, the Chaikin cover, and
and that ad, a lot of mashups there. So the Chaikin cover is a mashup. The 1986 Jack Kirby Comics Industry Award winner, Best New Series, that stuff's all mashed up on top. Something else that goes on in a lot of these pages, where like I'm pulling a few different things and putting together. So like the Miracle Man's a good example of what that looks like, where I'm pulling probably from 3 or 4 magazines and, across several different months to make that make sense.
Yeah. This is really weird. This whodunit, Who Shot Danny Scott, win $1,000.
Do you remember that? Is that
no? I don't.
All right. I just literally yesterday pulled the first 3 issues of that out of a warehouse.
Really?
Yeah. And it is exactly what it implies. And as far as I know, Eclipse paid that $1,000 to the winners. They were mystery stories. Each issue was was one story, and it was a mystery. And then you'd write in and, with your guess or whatever. And I don't know how they pulled it, if it was like the first answer or the right answer, or if they put all the right ones together and pulled it out.
Especially
but I thought it was a really great gimmick. And that was a full-size ad. It got shrunk down, because I couldn't quite give it a full page. But I did think, like, from a marketing standpoint, like, that's a pretty clever gimmick for a book.
Yeah, you know what? That's not actually a bad idea.
Right.
You could do something like that again with a small cash pot, and put it into a raffle if you get the right answer or something like that. That's kind of interesting way to advertise something. And of course, these box sets are coming out. You know, in 1986, these EC box sets are $85 to $100.
Yes. Yeah, I
That's
think that
nothing to
that's
sneeze at then.
something too, you know, thinking of like, what is EC Comics in 1986? And that's what it
Yeah,
is. You know, it's these beautiful library box sets.
Wortham's Seductive Evidence, and it's coming around again full circle in this year.
Yeah, I think the Wortham Seductive Evidence, I think I pulled out of something else, I believe. Although at
Okay.
this point it's been a while. But you know,
Yeah,
like it's a lot of this book is a mashup.
yeah, it looks like you did. I can see
Mhm.
there's paper grain difference there, so that's cool. And then this is how to print and publish a comic. It goes on for a couple pages here.
This is amazing. So if you see, the very first thing is the Rocket Comics Comet Tales #3. So it's a black and white comic from the time period, and it is an in-depth, you know, like I shrunk this stuff down, but it was like 15 pages of super in-depth detail of how to make a comic book. And I
Wow.
thought it was so well done, because it even talks about like preparing your files for a printer and things like that. I just wanted to have it all in there, but again, I couldn't give it like full size pages.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's shrunk down, but the information is, I think, amazing. If you've ever interested in how you made your own comics, at least in pre-digital times, this is a very detailed and clear example.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I didn't take too close of a look at this, and I really want to. And this is continuing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see, I think that's like 6 pages worth
Yeah.
combined there. So, like
Wow.
I say, very in depth, but also I don't disagree with any of it. You know, a lot of it's very technical.
Sure. Small Press Comics Explosion.
Yeah, this was a magazine that was published. They would review everything that would come out, because this is a time of mini comics and self-publishing. And if you ever come across these, this is a magazine-sized publication. There's probably 10 or 11 of them were published, but it would be like many, many columns of type with reviews like this big of, you know, 5 or 6 lines, looked like
Yeah.
personal ads. But basically he would review everything that came in. It was similar to like if you knew Fact Sheet 5,
Yes.
it would be like that kind of approach. You know, there'd be the address, like here's where you can get it, you know, send the guy $1 or whatever,
Right.
and a very brief little summary of it. And then there'd be some content too that might be related to self-publishing, or maybe an interview with creators. There'd be advertising that creators would buy, but it was really this focus on like self-publishing, and small press got big in that black and white explosion, and small press comics explosion was kind of cataloging a lot of that. And it's a really cool resource and snapshot of that time period if you're interested in that subject.
That's really cool.
Alan Moore spread.
Yep.
It's funny. I had a friend of mine was looking through this, and they got to the Maxwell the Magic Cat, and they're like, man, this could be published now. You know, like
Yeah.
weirdly, some of this material actually looks more, I don't know, contemporary today than it did at the time. But it's just kind of gathering up some of the stuff that Alan Moore is doing at the time, you know, again, checking in on some of the big creators from this era.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he's doing Watchmen. He's doing V for Vendetta. It looks like it's coming out.
yep. Halo Jones, you know, collecting some of that stuff from the UK.
And he's still doing Swamp Thing at the time, right?
Yes.
So, you know, he might have quit comics now, but he gave pretty much all a lifetime's worth to 1986. So we can't complain.
Yeah, you wonder when things change. And
Yeah.
I guess maybe shortly after 1986, maybe.
Yeah. So Chaikin is doing Times Squared, which kind of spilled off of American Flag, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And he also did so in the end papers in the beginning is that Shadow, right?
Yes.
So those both start happening this in 1986.
Yeah. Again, speaking to like how fast guys worked, you know, you
Yeah.
would think now like Times Square's graphic novel series, you know, that would be like all you might expect out of a creator for a couple of years. Wasn't the case back then. You know, everything was built on that monthly and maybe even 2 books a month kind of schedule. And a lot of this stuff, in my mind, it's history, and it happens like over a wide window of time. but you go back and look and it's like they do so many pages in a year. It's very different than the way things are today.
Yeah, I wonder how many pages they were cranking out a day. I mean, at least one, if not multiple.
Yeah, definitely.
Crap.
Some notes on that page too is Taboo, the great horror anthology. It says Sim to release new projects. I don't think Dave Sim actually released it, but a lot of these guys that got into self-publishing, you know, they would interact with Dave Sim and kind of get feedback from him. And he definitely staked a few things. Like I think he published Puma Blues and Flaming Carrot and some different stuff.
Yeah.
But I thought it was noteworthy because I think Bassett's horror anthology Taboo is one of the great comic book anthologies and one of the great horror comics. And I never hear it talked about. You know, he was such a creator right guy that a lot of that stuff, he never had the rights to reprint it. So, you know, it was like one and done. And now those books are hard to find and expensive. But in terms of just quality, it's an outstanding series.
Yeah, I think you can still get some directly from Bassett, if I'm not mistaken.
I have. So
yeah,
he still has a few.
Yeah. And I love this Crackbusters. The heck? Crack's whack, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Who can argue with that? I never saw that ad before. I think Rich Buckler might draw the first issue. You know, it's definitely a series that I have a couple of issues of, and it's just that 80s black and white explosion kind of stuff, what you would expect. A lot of that stuff is vigilante kind of justice comics.
Yeah, and, Reagan era.
Yeah, and that's what you get with Crackbusters. It's kind of funny. The ad is quite a bit different than the book, as my memory serves, although that main character with like the Crackbuster, you know, like the drugs with the circle around, like the Ghostbuster circle is ridiculous. That Punisher, by the way, is Bruce Timm fan art.
Yes, check that out.
If anybody wonders what Bruce Timm is doing in 1986.
There's your answer. This is really cool.
This is another catch-all in a lot of ways. Yeah. Lloyd Llewellyn is Dan Clowes' debut at Fantagraphics. I'm a big Dan Clowes fan, and of course he's gone on to have a remarkable career, but kind of starts at Fantagraphics in 86 with Lloyd Llewellyn, does a few issues of that. Some interesting reviews from those early issues. Some are positive, some are not, but that was fun to come across. And this is also a bit of a catch-all. You'll see on the right there, Dead World starts.
Right.
Huge fan of Dead World. The Ninja comics are everywhere, so I tried to throw in a couple of those. And 50th anniversary of Dick Tracy.
Wild.
I think I came across, there was a Chicago comic convention that year. And actually, you know what? I think I'm getting my years wrong. It was earlier, but they had Chester Gould as a guest. And he kind of showed up. This was an early issue of Comics Journal we covered on Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Okay.
And I think he kind of shows up, is a little bit weirded out because he's an old man at that point.
Yeah.
And pretty much left. Like he was there for like an hour or something. But they reported in the Comics Journal, somebody does like a big report on the Chicago Comic-Con that year. And it's noteworthy. It's Chester Gould, you know, like is one of the big guests. But he did not stick around too long. I think he was kind of like not his scene.
No, I'm a comic strips man, not a comic book man. Low lifes, I'm out of here.
Hey, if you ever get into like the 1954 Senate hearings, like those comic strip dudes really, that was what they said. You know, they're like,
I believe it.
Punch one of those those foul comic book artists if I ever saw one.
Oh yeah, Eisner was watching his back, just walking down the street, right?
Right.
So what is this? What did you do here?
All right, so this is back issues. I think this one is from like the spread is the Comics Journal. Yeah. And what I did was highlighted on the right, you can see there's like a white box, and that's highlighting the 1986 Comics Journal's issues. So you can just kind of get a quick, you know, who was cover artist, what was featured. And then I pasted up a lot of other stuff like logos, or not logos, but like names of a bunch of the publishers, as many as I could come up with. On the left, there's a column that's like negative type. It's white type on black. That's the Amazing Heroes 1986 back issues. Again, just as a checklist of like, what's going on in 1986? Between Comics Journal and Amazing Hero, you get a pretty good idea of like the big stories from that year. And then we were talking about Life Force. Yeah. If you see that comic panel in the bottom right corner by your thumb, that is a panel from Life Force. No.
Okay, so I do need to get that.
Yes, and you can't tell everything that's going on in that comic in that panel, but you can definitely get a sense of like how cool the lettering is. That lettering is, I can't believe somebody, if you look close, that is not one stroke lettering. Like all of the lettering in that book is painstakingly done.
Man, my wrist would fall apart lettering that book.
Yes. I am with you 100%. Craig Storman, man.
Yeah. Have you guys ever gone over this Crumb Gil Kane interview?
We did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we have covered that.
I'm gonna have to try, because that just sounds really weird. I haven't seen that episode, so that sounds very weird.
It's pretty good. Crumb has a couple of those. He has one with Bern Hogarth, and I can't remember if we covered that one too. But the Gil Kane, the Bern Hogarth one is a little controversial because Crumb's a little bit, I hate to say disrespectful, but he's kind of clowning around at times. I think it's a little bit, Hogarth is a little bit kind of taking this like elevated approach to, you know, comics as art. And I think Crumb is downplaying that a little bit. The Gil Kane one, Gary Groth is the moderator. That happened at a Dallas Comics Con. The 80s Dallas Con guest list were mind-blowing because they had everybody. I mean, they had Robert Crumb there, you know, it was like the full spectrum. But Groth, of course, is close to both Crumb and Gil Kane, and I think that's a much better conversation. But we do cover that on Cartoonist Kayfabe. We have an episode where we look at that conversation because, you know, it's two great cartoonists that are really coming at it from different directions.
Absolutely different.
Pretty good conversation.
Yeah, I'll have to go and check that one out.
I was going to include I would see like Dallas Comic Convention ads, you know, of course, putting this together, and considered including those just because, again, you could kind of get a snapshot of the comic scene of that time period by seeing like, who are these guests? And it was something that I just couldn't quite fit into these 80 pages, but was really insightful to see, like, you know, there weren't small press conventions. There weren't like art comics being separated from superhero comics. It was like a couple of conventions around the country. And if you were into the cartoonist, it was like, invite all these good cartoonists, mainstream and alternative and underground and everything. And that's what Dallas is, man. There were a couple years where that guest list is just, it would make your eyes go cross reading it.
I mean, that sounds like my kind of show, to be honest with you.
It really does.
Just give me everything. Throw it all at me.
In a weird way, it's almost like TCAF or something, you know, one of these shows that's very much like everybody. Bring them all in.
Heroes is a little bit that way.
They've definitely had some years where they would bring in some different, you know, alternative cartoonists, web cartoonists, you know, and you get that cross section of guests that it's interesting to see them all in one room.
Yeah, I'm here for it. You got continuity happening. It looks like it's already kind of, they acquired newsstand distribution. There we go. That's the big news.
Yeah, they're trying to.
Yeah.
But again, you know, what's Neil Adams doing in 1986? And there's your answer.
Yep. And then you got all the different logos for the different publications.
Absolutely. I love that part of it. So
that's great.
Represent that stuff.
It's cool to just kind of like wash your eye over it and see which one stands out to you the most. And, you know. Yeah.
And if you're into, you know, if you do any kind of back issue digging or whatever, like you'll probably come across many of these logos.
Oh, yeah.
Over time.
Absolutely. And the final end papers.
Yeah. And it's a different selection of covers, you know, from the opening ones. So again, just trying to represent that time period for somebody that didn't live through it, or maybe wasn't a collector or going to comic shops. I'm hoping this gives you a sense of that, you know, almost like the atmosphere of those times.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, you did just a fantastic job. Even the front and back cover, you know, give it all its glory, you know. Again, you really love fucking with people's eyes, don't you?
Hey, it's visual field. You know, if you don't like that, maybe you're in the wrong field.
Right, exactly. Such a cool cover too. Well, thanks for going through this with me, man. This is amazing, and I just really hope that everybody watching goes and grabs a copy of it. I'm not going to release this until they're able to, because we're recording it before you have it available on your website, right?
Yes, and that'll be October 26th, and it's jimrugg.com. I do have a lot of them. I don't know if I'll have enough for everybody. So if you're watching this and you want one, go there now and get it.
All right. And where else can everybody find you?
I am on Cartoonist Kayfabe every single day on YouTube. We usually post our videos first thing in the morning. We've been doing that for 5 years, so we have 1,500 videos there. Whoever cartoonist you like or comic book title you like, we probably covered it in some shape or form. So check out Cartoonist Kayfabe. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Jim Rugg, where I post a lot of my comics first. I have a lot of zines and mini comics there that you can download that are out of print and hard to find. So you can check that out. And Instagram, Jim Rugg Art, all one word. That's a place also mostly I post my artwork, maybe a cat photo now and then. But those are probably the easiest places to see more of my art.
Okay. Well, I'll put it down in the show notes for sure. And you can all go and grab your copy before it sells out. Thanks for coming on, Jim. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Chris. This was great.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All righty.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my Patreon, where at the $3 level, I'll send you my sketchbook, The Sketch of the Masters, and at the $5 level, I'll send you the sketchbook plus my mini stories, Not Man Nor Beast But Moss, Stench of the Sea, and The Voyeur. At the $8 level, after a year, you'll get a commission. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter in the show notes. Check out my store, where I have lots of original art. And you can also buy books like Lost Angels, a sci-fi YA adventure about a girl who has to solve a mystery in a crashed alien city. Spectral, a showcase of fear, is about a sinister puppet master who travels from town to town telling tales to children who may never sleep again. You can request a commission at any time just by contacting me. Here is a list of the upcoming conventions that I'll be at the time that this video was released. And don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the video. Again, thanks for watching.